Welcome back to Eatsy, where if we can make Chinese steamed buns, then so can you. Chinese steamed buns, or white buns, are commonly known as mantou. Mantou are light and fluffy and make an ideal side to go with your other Chinese foods, like our hot and sour soup that you should totally go check out in our playlist. Mantou directly translates to barbarian's head, and the name originated from a military strategist from the Three Kingdoms period of China. The strategist needed to get his men across a river that was full of rough and treacherous waters. The locals told him to make offerings to the river dragon for safe passage, in the form of 50 human heads. Dude was like, okay, so I'm not gonna sacrifice my own men. Instead, I'm gonna make these little buns and shape them in the shape of human heads, and then throw them into the river instead. And I guess this was the river dragon in charge that day because he totally went for it, and the strategist and his men all crossed the river unharmed. So let's jump right into it. We're going to start with 10 grams of yeast in a bowl. Crack in 1 egg, and pour in half a teaspoon of sugar. And finally a pinch of salt, or a third of a teaspoon if you want to get technical. Pour in 250 grams or 8.8 ounces of warm water. Stir it all up until it looks like this. And let it sit until bubbles start forming on the surface. Then you can add in the 450 grams of flour. Continue mixing and adding in room temperature cups of water until you get to the point and consistency where you can start mixing the dough by hand and rolling it in the bowl. To get ours to look like this, we ended up using about 280 grams of water per every 450 grams of flour. So when you're done forming your dough into a ball, cover it with a lid or with saran wrap and set it aside to let it continue rising. After letting it rise, it should almost fill the bowl. Then take 25 grams or 0.8 ounces of baking powder and lightly sprinkle it over the top of the dough. Then, while periodically using flour to help with how sticky the dough will be, start rolling it into a ball again to free it from the bowl. When it's free from the bowl, slap that bad boy onto a floured surface and start rolling it into something that looks like a giant Yule log. When you're satisfied with the shape of your giant white sea cucumber, put a bowl over top of it and let it sit for another few minutes. According to Auntie and Uncle, if you let your dough sit like this for another few minutes, it'll make it easier to roll out into the shapes you need later. After letting it rest for a few minutes, begin cutting your dough log into long strips from end to end. Then take those long strips and begin rolling them into super long fat noodles. Starting at one end of the dough, grab a small chunk and quickly yoink it off the end of the noodle. Try to grab the same amount each time. Here's a close-up of Auntie showing you how she does it. We made very big mantou, each one weighing about 130 grams. It is an extremely large bun, so you might want to make yours 100 grams or maybe even less if you want smaller buns. There are two shapes for mantou. One is the classic round one, and you form it into a ball, just like how Auntie is showing you how to do it here. Here it is again slowed down. What she's doing is squishing her thumb down into the middle and then rolling the outside edge back over it again. But if you're like me and think to yourself there has to be an easier way, there is. You can make square mantou buns instead. To do that, you take a large chunk of dough and roll it into what looks like an ordinary loaf of bread, kind of like an elongated football. Roll it all out a little bit more into a big fat dough sausage. Then grab a large knife and cut it into quarters. Of course, they're not perfectly square when they're steamed, but the flat edge of the knife cut is what gives these mantou their name, being square mantou. It's easy for these ones to get really large though, so make sure you don't cut them too big. So eventually, whether they're square or round, you should have a plate full of buns ready to be steamed. Before you can steam them, Prepare some parchment paper so that each mantou has its own little square for when it's steamed. Having a square of parchment paper will prevent the mantou from sticking to whatever pan you're using to steam them. You'll want to cut your papers at least 3 inches square for each mantou. Put a square of paper on the bottom of your steaming pan and put a bun on each one. Auntie and Uncle had this gargantuan steaming pot because they're rock stars like that, but you don't need one this big, just anything that you can use to steam vegetables regularly. Starting with cool water but on a high heat, steam the buns for 20 minutes. And there you have it! Mantou, or Chinese steam buns. These are excellent to have for breakfast in the morning. You could put them with eggs or bacon or even peanut butter and jelly if you really want. We like having them with soups and stews, so again, I encourage you to check out our hot and sour soup recipe, and you can try them both out together. If you learned something new or enjoyed this video, consider giving the subscribe button a click for us. And if you give us a like, it lets us know that you enjoy this type of content. Let us know down in the comments if you tried making mantou, and as always, thank you so much for watching.